A very warm welcome everyone. Today in this class, we will be continuing the chapter Atomic Structure and Chemical Bond, Unit 14, Class 9 under the subject Science and Technology. I hope you are prepared with all the materials that you need for your class, your notebooks and your pens. So without further ado, let's get started. So in previous classes, we have already discussed about chemical bonds, the electrovalent bond and the covalent bond. And we have also studied something about atoms. In today's class, we will focus on the nucleus of an atom and the nuclear reaction its uses and its effects, etc. in this class. So before explaining about the nucleus and all those new topics, let us revise a little about atom. So an atom is the smallest particle of an element that can take part in a chemical reaction. Now, in this figure, you can see that there is the atom of an oxygen, and you can see that there is a nucleus which is represented by this gray circle in which the protons and the neutrons reside in it, and the electrons are revolving around the nucleus in a certain speed. So this proton and neutron are collectively known as the nucleons. And the electron, the proton and the neutron that is present inside the atom is known as the subatomic particles. So how we can define the subatomic particles is, subatomic particles are the particles that is found inside an atom and they are responsible for forming the structure of an atom. Now, we have discussed about electron, proton and neutron right now. There are other subatomic particles as well, but we will not be studying this in class 9. You will be studying about all the other subatomic particles in further classes in your higher studies. So in today's class, you will have to remember there are 3 subatomic particles: the electrons, the protons and the neutrons. Now, let me ask you a question. In all the chemical reaction that we have studied in the previous class, and among all those reactions, which subatomic particles are usually involved in those chemical reactions? Can you tell me? If you are confused, let me give you a hint. So you can see all these molecules and compounds we have studied. So can you guess which is the subatomic particle that usually is involved in the chemical reaction? Yes, it's the electrons, because we had studied that the electron takes part in the chemical reaction either by sharing the electron present in its outermost orbit or by donating the electron present in its outermost orbit. So the electrons are the subatomic particles that are mostly involved in the chemical reaction. Now, why does electron only take part in the chemical reaction, but the proton and neutron that is present inside the nucleus that does not react? Well, it is because in the chemical reaction, the energy that is formed or evolved, or the heat energy that is evolved, is not enough to break the nucleus, that is, break the subatomic particle individually that is present inside the nucleus, so that the individual subatomic particle can take part in the chemical reaction. So since there is not enough energy to dissociate the nucleus into its subatomic particle, that's why the protons and neutrons cannot take part in the chemical reaction. But the electron that is present around the nucleus can readily take part in the chemical reaction. Now let us study a little more about the nucleus and the nuclear stability, how the nucleus is stable. So as I mentioned earlier, the nucleus consists of neutrons and protons. So tell me, what is a proton? Yes, proton are the positively charged particles. So what is a neutron? Is it a negatively charged particle? No, you're right. It's not a negatively charged particles, because electrons are the negatively charged particles. So what is a neutron? What charge does the neutron hold? Yes, neutron has no charge. It is a chargeless particles. So protons are the subatomic particles that is positively charged, whereas the neutron is a subatomic particle that has no charge. Now, since the protons has both positive charge, what type of force does the two proton has between each other? Is it attractive or repulsive? Can you guess? Yes, it is a repulsive force, because since both the protons have a positive charge, so they repel from each other. So the protons that is present inside the nucleus, what happens is the two protons, they have an electrostatic repulsion between them. So they try to move away from each other. So even though the proton tries to move away from each other, why doesn't the nucleus dissociate? It is because of presence of neutron. Why? Because the force between the neutron and the proton is an attractive one, and that force is known as the strong nuclear force. And this strong nuclear force is much more stronger than the electrostatic repulsion force between the two protons. And due to this reason, the nucleus is stable and it does not dissociate because of the presence of strong nuclear force that overcomes the electrostatic repulsion between the proton. So, due to the strong nuclear force between the neutron and the proton is the reason why the nucleus does not dissociate. So, we can say that the balance between these two forces, the electrostatic repulsion and the strong nuclear force, determines the stability of the nucleus. Now, we have studied that protons and neutrons have strong nuclear force and two protons have electrostatic repulsion between them. Electrostatic repulsion is a repulsive force and the strong nuclear force is an attractive force. So, in an atom, if the number of proton in the nucleus increases, then what happens? If proton number increases, then what happens? Can you guess? Yes, the repulsive force increases, because if there is more number of proton, then the two proton try to move away from each other. That is, the electrostatic repulsion occurs. So, what happens if the number of proton increases? The total electrostatic repulsion also increases. So, to maintain the stability when the number of proton increases, what happens is additional number of neutrons is required. Why? Because the force between the neutron and the proton is the strong nuclear force, which is stronger than the repulsive force. So, additional number of neutrons are required to stabilize that nucleus, to stabilize or overcome that electrostatic repulsive force. So, additional number of neutrons are required to stabilize the nucleus. Now, let me ask you a question. We have just mentioned that if there is increase in number of proton, the electrostatic repulsive force increases. So, what does it mean when you say that the number of proton increases? Can you guess? Yes, it means the increase in the atomic number. Why? Because atomic number is the total number of protons that is present in the nucleus of one atom of an element. So, if the number of proton increases, that means the atomic number increases. So, the element having higher atomic number has more electrostatic repulsive force and it requires more neutrons to be stable. Now, let me ask you another question. So, what does the increase in both the number of proton and the neutron tells us? Yes, it means increase in the atomic weight. Why? Because atomic weight is the sum of the total number of protons and the neutrons that is present in nucleus of one atom of an element. So, if both the protons and neutrons number increases, its sum is also greater. So, that means since the sum of the protons and neutrons is an atomic weight, increase in number of proton and neutron means increase in the atomic weight. So, what does this means is number of proton increase and number of neutron increase means the atomic number and the atomic mass increase. So, that means larger element that has higher atomic mass. So we are talking about larger element that has higher atomic mass. So they have a difficulty in being stable, and they require additional stuff to become stable. So let us study stability of nucleus by a graph. This is the graph, and in the y-axis you can see that there is the number of neutrons, and in the x-axis atomic number means number of proton is plotted. Now, for an atom to be stable, what we need is the ratio of what? The number of the neutron to the number of the proton. So the ratio of number of the neutron to the number of the proton should be equal to 1. So if this ratio is 1, then the nucleus is stable. And for smaller element, the ratio of the number of the neutron to the number of the proton is 1. So that's why smaller elements are comparatively stable. Now, when the atomic number increases when the atomic number increases, so number of proton increases, to balance that increase in number of proton means electrostatic repulsive force increases. So to balance that, additional number of neutrons is required so that strong nuclear force can win over the electrostatic repulsive force. So in the larger element, the ratio of the number of neutron to the proton starts to become greater than 1. So this is represented by this graph. Here you can see that this line is a stability line, and these all dots are the ratio of the elements, and the ratio is of number of neutron to the number of proton. So if the ratio of number of neutron to the proton, these dots, are closer to the stability line, then those atoms are stable. And if they are far from the stability line, then we can say that those atoms are unstable. And those atoms which are unstable are usually the atoms that has higher atomic number, and the ratio of the number of proton to the number of neutron is much more than 1. So the nucleus becomes unstable. And in this unstable nuclei, the strong nuclear force does not generate the enough binding energy. Then what does the strong nuclear force do? Yes, it binds the protons and the neutrons together so that the nucleus is stable. But in the unstable nuclei, this force, the strong nuclear force, does not have enough energy to hold the nucleus together permanently. So what happened is, this unstable nuclei, it dissociates, and while dissociating, it releases some radioactive substances or radiations. That's why unstable nuclei are also called as radioactive, and they are also known as radioactive nuclei. Now we have already studied about radioactive nuclei. So let us study what a radioactive element is. So those elements that has a very high atomic number, and those which are usually unstable. Unstable means the nucleus is unstable. So they are usually unstable, and they releases energetic radiation when they are going from an unstable state to a stable state. So those elements are known as radioactive element. So radioactive elements are the elements that has high atomic number and have an unstable nuclei. So when that unstable nuclei goes from that unstable state to the stable state, it releases very harmful energetic radiations. Those type of elements is known as radioactive elements. And some of the example of such radioactive elements are uranium, plutonium, thorium, etc. Now here you can see that this is the atomic structure of uranium. You can see how large this atomic structure is. And this uranium is also a radioactive element, and it has a very high atomic number, and it is unstable, and it releases harmful radiation. we just mentioned that elements having high atomic number are usually radioactive. So how much high? That is, if the elements have the atomic number more than 83, then those elements are usually radioactive. Now, the element that has exactly the atomic number 83 is bismuth. And here we mentioned that the bismuth is over here in the periodic table. So, elements having atomic number higher than bismuth lies after bismuth. So, these elements that are highlighted in this bright green color are usually radioactive. You can see that almost all the elements are radioactive that has atomic number more than 83. So, we have to remember that the elements having atomic number 83, more than 83 are usually radioactive. We cannot say all the elements are radioactive because here so many elements that is present in this line is not radioactive. So, more than 83, if the element has atomic number more than 83, they are usually radioactive. Now, we said about radioactive. So, what are the radiation that those radioactive elements emit? Those are the alpha radiation, the beta radiation, and the gamma radiation. Now, let us study about this a little. So, alpha radiation is the radiation that consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Now, which is the element that has 2 protons and 2 neutrons? Can you guess? Yes, it is the heavy helium isotope. So, here you can see that this is the nucleus of a heavy helium. You can see there is 2 protons and 2 neutrons present. So, this radiation, alpha radiation, is also similar to the helium-4 nucleus. So, the radiation that has 2 protons and 2 neutrons, and that represents helium-4 nucleus, is known as the alpha radiation. Now, let us talk about another radiation, that is the beta radiation. So, beta radiation is the type of radiation that constitutes of electrons that has high energy and that is traveling in a very high speed. So, high energy and high speed electrons that are ejected from the nucleus by some radionuclides is called as beta radiation. So, beta radiation are high energy and high speed electrons that are ejected from the unstable nucleus of the radioactive elements. Now, the gamma radiation is also a radiation that is emitted, and the gamma radiation is a type of electromagnetic radiation that arises from the electroactive decay of the atomic nuclei. So, gamma radiation is an electromagnetic radiation, and it is a radiation that has very high frequency and it can penetrate through our body easily. So, it is very harmful as well. So, gamma radiation is also a type of electromagnetic radiation that arises by the radioactive decay of the atomic nuclei. Now, all these radioactive emissions are very harmful to us. So, the effects of all those radioactive emissions are, it might cause us hair loss, it also may cause us nausea and vomiting, and a little longer exposure to this radioactive emission may cause us radiation burns in our skin. And prolonged exposure to this radioactive emission may also cause us DNA damage. So, it damages the DNA and may cause various mutations in the organism. Not only mutation, it can also trigger various cancerous cells and may cause cancer in our body. And due to all these, there might also be a death of an organism. So, these are all the harmful effects of radioactive emission. So, we should always protect ourselves from all these radioactive emissions. Now, let us study a little about the history of radioactivity and how radioactivity was discovered. So, the first scientist who discovered radioactivity was Henry Becquerel, and he mistakenly, that is accidentally, discovered the radioactivity. So, what he did was, he had placed a photographic plate on a table and he had covered it with a black paper, and he had just placed some uranium salt over the black paper. and he did not expect any image to be formed on the photographic plate. But to his surprise, he found that there was this kind of image that I've shown here in the photographic plate. And to his surprise, he noticed that the uranium had emitted some radiation that could penetrate through this black paper, and it formed its image on that photographic plate. And that is how radioactivity was discovered. And for this discovery, he also got a Nobel Prize. And this discovery is very useful for us because due to this radioactivity, X-rays and all the imaging modalities has been discovered. That is, in X-ray, what happens? X-ray is used to take the photograph of our bones that is present inside us. So we can see if there is any fractures or if any disease that is present inside the bone. So radioactivity, this discovery of radioactivity was very useful for the human beings. So that's why he also got a Nobel Prize for this discovery. Now let us study a little about the reaction that occurs with the nucleus. So the reactions are the two types of reaction, the nuclear fission and the nuclear fusion. So at first we'll start with nuclear fission. So here you can see a heavy nuclei. So when this heavy nuclei is bombarded by the high-speed neutron, it then splits into two smaller nucleus with the release of high amount of energy. Now we will study this nuclear fission process again. So when a heavy nucleus, that is, for example, a uranium nucleus, it is bombarded with the high-speed neutron, the uranium nuclei then splits into two smaller nuclei, that is that of krypton and barium, and also releases some neutrons, and it also releases tremendous amount of energy. So we can define nuclear fission as nuclear fission is the splitting of the nucleus of a heavier atom into smaller one. So let us write the reaction that occurs here. Uranium, a very heavy nuclei that has the atomic number 92 and atomic weight of 235. When it is bombarded by high-speed neutron, neutron is a chargeless particle. When it is bombarded by a high-speed neutron, what happens? It breaks down into two smaller nuclei, that is of krypton and barium. So, krypton and barium. So, krypton has the atomic number 56 and atomic weight 141, and barium has atomic number 36 and atomic weight 92. And there is release of 3 neutrons as well, and tremendous amount of energy of about 236 kilocalorie is released. So this reaction is an example of nuclear fission reaction in which a heavy nucleus of uranium splits into two smaller nucleus of krypton and barium when it is bombarded with the high speed neutron, and it releases high amount of energy as well. So we just studied about this reaction in which the uranium is broken down into two smaller nuclei, barium and krypton, when it is bombarded by high-speed neutron, and it also releases tremendous amount of energy in this process. Now let us see this reaction again. Nucleus of a heavy nucleus, when it is bombarded with a neutron, what happened? Very large number of energy was released. So this energy is released by the destruction of mass. Mass is converted into energy in this reaction. Now, since one neutron, when it bombards the heavy nucleus, 3 neutrons was released, and those 3 neutrons again goes and attacks other nuclei. So in this way, chain of reaction occurs, and in each reaction, tremendous amount of energy is released. So what happens is, let us see this again. So since tremendous amount of energy is released, so this type of reaction is also known as chain of reactions, and due to this tremendous amount of energy that it is released, it is usually used as a nuclear weapon in forming nuclear bomb, because the energy released is very fast and uncontrollable. So this is one of the use of nuclear fission reaction. Now the another use of nuclear fission reaction is it is used in a nuclear reactor, where this nuclear fission is controlled, it is under control and it is very slow, so that the massive explosion does not occur. So if the reaction is slow and controlled, the released energy now that is generated is used to generate electricity. So this is another use of nuclear fission, and we'll study about this in detail later on. So now let us study about another type of nuclear reaction, that is the nuclear fusion reaction. In nuclear fusion, what happens? Two small nucleus, they collide with each other, they fuses, and then they form a bigger nuclei and they release tremendous amount of energy in this process. So from this video and from what I explained, well, how we can define nuclear fusion is the process of combination of lighter nuclei to form a heavy nucleus. So that is a nuclear fusion. In nuclear fission, there was breaking down of a larger nuclei into smaller one, whereas in nuclear fusion, the smaller or lighter nuclei fuses to form a heavy nucleus. Let us take an example of a nuclear fusion reaction. When lighter nuclei of hydrogen fuses together, they form a heavier helium nuclei with the release of tremendous amount of energy. And this type of reaction, it continuously occurs in the stars and the suns. And this fusion reaction is possible because of presence of abundant amount of hydrogen in the stars and the suns, as well as high amount of pressure and very high temperature. So this reaction is possible. So until now, nuclear fusion reaction is not really possible because to make it in the laboratory, because this type of condition that is required for nuclear fusion is not possible to build up until now. That's why nuclear fusion reaction does not really happen on Earth. It happens outside the Earth in the suns and the stars. So let us study how this happens in the sun in detail. So here what happens is 4 atoms of hydrogen, that is protium, it fuses to form a heavy helium with the release of tremendous amount of energy. So here lighter nuclei, it fuses together to form a heavy nucleus of helium, and this reaction occurs in the core of the sun. So we just studied about this reaction. Now let us study this reaction in detail by understanding the stepwise reaction. So what happens is, at first here you can see that the protium, it fuses together to form a deuterium isotope of hydrogen. So 2 protium fuses to form a deuterium. It is also represented here in the figure, and tremendous amount of energy is also released in this step. Now what happens is, this deuterium that is formed again reacts with protium to form a lighter helium isotope, and this formed light helium isotope that has atomic mass of 3, then these two, this fuses together to form a heavy helium atom, that is helium-4, which has the atomic mass of 4 with the release of 2 protium, that is 2 light hydrogen. Now this protium, that is the isotope of hydrogen, it again goes and continue this reaction. So the chain of reaction occurs. So this is the step process of the nuclear fusion that occurs on the core of the sun. So in the sun, the temperature of the sun's core is around 50 15 million degrees centigrade, and the pressure is also very high at the core of the sun. So in this condition, hydrogen nuclei, it fuses to form helium with the release of massive amount of energy in the form of heat. And in every second, 600 million tons of hydrogen is being converted to helium in the sun. And this heat that the sun produces due to nuclear fusion reaction, it reaches the surface of the earth. And this heat and light from the sun made life on earth possible. So it is the nuclear fusion reaction that occurs in the sun, it made the life on the earth possible. Now let us study about the nuclear energy or the atomic energy. We already studied that in the process of nuclear fusion and fission, in the process of nuclear fusion and fission, tremendous amount of energy is released. So how we can define that nuclear energy is? Nuclear energy is a type of energy that is released from the nucleus during the nuclear reaction. So this source of energy can be produced by two ways. That is, when the nucleus of an atom, it splits into several parts, or by fusion, that is when the nuclei fuses together. So this is known as the nuclear energy. And this nuclear energy can be used in various purposes in our day-to-day life. First of all, I've already explained that nuclear energy from the sun is the reason why life on earth is possible. But this nuclear energy cannot be made in the laboratory because the condition required for that reaction is cannot be easily made artificially. So except that uses, we will be studying other uses of nuclear energy. So I've already explained this previously. So nuclear energy is used to generate electricity by using steam engine. So let us understand this step by step. So in a nuclear reactor, nuclear fission occurs, and during the nuclear fission process, tremendous amount of energy is released, and that energy is used to heat the water, and the water is converted into steam. Now this steam reaches the turbine and it rotates the turbine, which in turn rotates the coil that is present inside the generator. Now when the coil rotates inside the generator, electricity is produced. And this electricity is used for various purposes in our day-to-day life. Now the steam that reaches the turbine is then again passed through the condenser, which condenses the steam again back to its liquid form, that is water, and the water is then again circulated into the nuclear reactor, and this process continuously happens. So in this process, what happens is nuclear energy is converted into electrical energy. Now the other uses of nuclear energy is, it is used for sterilization of various medical devices. So the radiation that is released from the unstable nuclei that takes part in the nuclear reaction, and those radiation, especially the gamma radiation, is used to sterilize the medical devices. And the other radiations as well is used to sterilize the drinking water and food without contaminating it by radioactive decomposition. So during sterilization, they safely sterilize this water and without hampering our human health. So this nuclear energy is also used to sterilize medical devices or as well as the water we drink and the food we eat. So the final use of nuclear radiation or the nuclear energy that we are going to discuss is for the treatment of cancer. So during the treatment of cancer, the radiation that is released from this nucleus is used to kill various cancerous cells that is present inside the person that is suffering from cancer. So it is also used to treat cancer by radiation therapy. Let us try to solve a certain questions and try to answer the questions and test our knowledge. So the first question we have is, nuclear fission and nuclear fusion, both are the chemical reaction in which the nucleus of an atom takes part in the reaction. Is this true? No, it's not true. You guys must have been confused because this is not a chemical reaction. This is a nuclear reaction. Yes, in nuclear fission and fusion, nucleus of an atom takes part in the reaction, but that reaction is not called as chemical reaction. It is called as nuclear reaction. That's why the statement is incorrect, because it is not a chemical reaction. It is a nuclear reaction in which nucleus of the atom takes part in the reaction. Now, let us check if the argument 1 is correct or not. In both cases, tremendous amount of energy is produced. Is this true? Yes, it's true, because in both nuclear fission and fusion, tremendous amount of energy is released when either the nucleus fuses or the nucleus dissociates. Now, the final argument. Both of them are used for the production of electrical energy in the nuclear power plant. Is this true? No, it's not true. Why? Because the nuclear fusion reaction is not possible to make it in the lab. So, because the condition necessary for that reaction is high temperature and high pressure and very high amount of hydrogen. So, that type of condition is not possible to recreate in the laboratory. So, for the production of electrical energy, only the nuclear fission process is used, not the nuclear fusion. So, the argument 2 is also incorrect. So, the correct answer is option 2. Argument 1 is correct. Now, let us solve the final question. So, find the correct and incorrect arguments of the following. Here we have 4 arguments. Now, let us check if individual one of them is correct or not. Number 1. Light helium and normal helium both have same atomic mass. Is this true? No, it's not true, because light helium has atomic mass of 3 and normal helium has atomic mass of 4. So that's why this statement is incorrect. Now the second statement. Deuterium is heavier than tritium. Is this true? Let me write this. So deuterium means, and tritium. So which of them is heavier, deuterium or tritium? Yes, the tritium is heavier because its atomic mass is more than the deuterium. So this statement 2 is incorrect. Now statement 3. Very high temperature and tremendous pressure is needed for nuclear fusion. Is this true? Yes, it's true, because as I mentioned earlier, this nuclear fusion reaction happens in the core of the sun, and in there is millions of degrees centigrade temperature and tremendous amount of pressure. So due to those conditions, this nuclear fusion is possible. So statement 3 is correct. Very high temperature and tremendous pressure is needed for nuclear fusion. Now the final statement. Nuclear fission of uranium produces barium and krypton. Is this true? Yes, it's true, because I mentioned in the example of the nuclear fission that the heavy uranium nuclei, when it is bombarded by high-speed neutron, the heavy nucleus of the uranium, it dissociates into 2 lighter nuclei of barium and krypton. So that's why the statement 4 is also correct. Now we have come to an end of this chapter. So we have already studied so many topics under it. We studied about the ions, we studied about the chemical bonds, the molecular weights, molecular formulas, how to write molecular formula by crisscross methods. We also studied about the subatomic particles, the radioactive elements, as well as nuclear fusion and nuclear fission reaction and its uses. I hope you all understood everything I've taught you in this chapter. So I'll see you guys in the next class.